All right, I'm Kelly. I went to the VCU Brand Center. Are you guys familiar with that program?
Mhm.
Okay. So I did Brand Center for 2 years, and then I was hired to Chiat Day in Los Angeles. I worked on Jimmy Dean there, but Chiat Day is famous for having the Apple account. They've had that since the 80s. They did the Absolute campaign. So they're just a really big global networked agency, 700 people, great first advertising experience for me. At the time in 2011, it was just, the accounts were so big, they were totally TV focused. And I knew from my own experience and from what my friends were doing that our eyeballs are just moving to the digital space. And we were looking at that time, Facebook a lot more than watching TV. So I wanted to start to get experience on kind of smaller mid-sized clients where their budgets would be forcing them to be more efficient with their dollars, potentially spend in digital, spend on social. So after that, I moved back. I wasn't looking to leave Los Angeles. I love Los Angeles. But the agency that ended up kind of meeting all of my criteria and sounded really exciting was back in North Carolina, where I'm from. So I moved to North Carolina. I worked on nationwide insurance for about a year. That sounds really boring in some ways. In some ways it was, but we also did some Super Bowl commercials for them, which was a lot of fun. And then someone I worked with there ended up moving to LA at Deutsch and hired me to the Taco Bell account. So I worked on that for about a year and a half, most fun I've ever had in advertising. And I'll probably refer back, just as I'm talking through process, I'll probably refer to some of those campaigns. At that point, I was sort of looking to expand kind of my strategy skills and apply them in different directions. I was starting to brand consult with startups and help them with their positioning. And I went to work for a media tech startup because, again, I just wanted to understand digital media buying a lot more. I knew that was where the future of where all advertisements were going to live. So I was learning a lot about analytics and how to optimize creative against digital analytics. They also had the Poopery account. Do you guys know that Poopery spot where the British woman's on the toilet?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. So they also had some creative chops that I was excited about. Did that for a little bit. Never thought I wanted to go back to a huge agency again. I like the flatter structure and kind of efficiency of that. But then Crispin and Boulder reached out, and Alex Bogoski had just come back. And I don't know if you guys know who Alex is. He was sort of a legendary creative in the 90s and early 2000s. And I had a picture of him in my dorm room next to my Radiohead poster in college, like obsessed. Like basically Crispin, when I started kind of in high school, I was obsessed with commercials and thought I wanted to write. But I had no idea how you did that. So I was just looking up, I was like, advertisements, who makes advertisements? Is it movie directors? I have no idea. And Crispin came up at the time and Alex came up. So when they reached out, it just seemed kind of like a dream opportunity to go work for him while he was back in the industry. So that's how I ended up in Colorado. At Crispin, I worked on Fruit of the Loom and Hotels.com. Both needed kind of significant, Fruit of the Loom needed significant brand repositioning work. And then Hotels.com kind of had some fun ads with Captain Obvious, but they didn't have a consistent brand platform that would help them go beyond Captain Obvious or any sort of direction of where to take him next. So I was working on that. When I started at Crispin, Jesse and Heather had the copywriting and art direction track going. And I think a few people from the creative department were teaching those classes. So they started getting connected with the strategy department, asked if anyone would help them launch the strategy track. And I sort of raised my hand for that because I went to the brand center and kind of had that model for creating this curriculum too. Plus, again, I'm always looking for new ways to challenge myself and grow, and helping develop the track just sounded like it would be that. A lot of ads like still suck. You see commercials and pre-roll that are just terrible, or banner ads that are just, most advertising sucks. And that's not because there's a shortage of great creative thinkers and great concepts and great ideas. And in a large part, it's because clients They just think different. They're more rational. They're more data driven. And I think strategy works two ways. It's fundamental kind of role. It's a lot of consumer and cultural research, and then helping brands position themselves and products against that in ways that are relevant. And then we write the creative briefs for creatives to concept off of. And those should be, it sounds rational, and I explained it in a rational way, and I'll get into this, but it's inspired. Your strategies should be really inspiring and an awesome jumping off point for creative thinking. And then another major role that we play is helping sell kind of radical creative ideas, and radical creative ideas that we know are going to be effective in helping clients move their business forward. So I think the more bright minds that we can bring into strategy, the more we can have conversations like this and just introduce people to what strategy is. I think the better opportunities that we have to make better advertising, because strategy plays, they're making those business cases for why clients should buy, portraying McDonald's as a communist regime, for example, if you're Taco Bell. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, that's a little bit of background. I definitely want to answer all the questions you have. Would it be helpful for me to talk to you guys a little bit about a day in the life of a strategist, or kind of what the strategic process is and what a strategist is doing along it?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So like you hear probably from a lot of people who work, no day is ever the same. But as a strategist, you're kind of working along this continuum and a project process. So that starts with getting the client's brief. And let's say it's Taco Bell. They haven't been selling much Taco Bell breakfast and they want to sell more tacos at breakfast. So they tell you that, and they give you that business objective. And then in most cases, you already know who your target audience is, unless you're doing a pitch or they want to grow with a different target audience. You know who that audience is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lisa.
Is this to win the client's brief, or have the client's already paid you to take on that brief?
Yeah, I'm starting with you have the business.
Okay.
But it's sort of in a pitch, it's similar. They give you kind of their business objectives, and then you pitch it the way you would propose a campaign that they buy off on. They just may or may not choose you or buy off on that campaign. So the difference is,
and sorry, I don't mean to derail you too much, but one thing I've always been curious about is if you're working to win a client over, are you essentially taking the risk of working for free because you might not win the client?
100%. That's a big conversation in advertising. And some bigger agencies / famous agencies / agencies with new business people who have giant balls ask to get paid to pitch. And sometimes that happens, but I would say that that's an exception. So yeah, it's the cost of doing business to put in a whole lot of time for a business that you might not actually win. So part one, you get the brief, you look at the brief, and then you ask them, you get whatever additional information you think they might have that you need. Then phase two is this gigantic research phase. And the way that I like to think about it, and the way that some people describe it, is you're researching within 4 categories of research. So client, you're learning everything you can about the client and product. Competitive, you're looking at who that client or product is competing against. Where, how are they communicating? How are they positioning themselves? How are they showing up in the marketplace, whether that's on an e-commerce website or Amazon, or if it's craft salad dressings, where is its shelf placement and retail stores. So that's competitive. Then there's, most importantly, consumer, understanding your consumer audience. You definitely have a demographic information, which is like age, gender, education level, household income. Then you're looking at them behaviorally. How do they shop for your product? And then how, what are their hobbies and interests? How do they behave in life? And then you're looking at psychographics. So what are their attitudes and values? What do they care about as human beings, not just as it relates to breakfast or tacos or fast food, but what are kind of their intrinsic values as humans? And then the fourth piece is culture. What are macro trends that might be happening that would influence perceptions of Taco Bell or perceptions around fast food and health, of course. So those are the 4 C's. So that's basically what you're looking at during the research phase. And so you're gathering this mountain of information, so much information. And as a junior especially, you're very much responsible for doing a lot of that digging and pulling in a lot of that information. When I was a junior at Chiat, I spent so much time doing man on the street interviews is what they're called. So going out to shopping centers, we went to the airport a lot to baggage claim because people are just standing around, to sort of run strategic positioning statements by them or ask them. When we were pitching Southwest Airlines, we were looking for those funny anecdotes that Southwest Airlines is known for. So that's a specific methodology, those man on the street interviews. But my point is, as a junior, like you are the grunt work for pulling all of that research. Then, so you've got this pile of information. Then you need to get to insights. So you're getting to insights by thinking about the whys behind some of what you're observing in your research, sometimes connecting the dots between different pieces of research to get to an insight. And that's what becomes kind of the fuel for your creative brief. So the next phase is developing the creative brief. There's so many different brief templates. Really bad briefs are really long and there's like all this detail that's not important. The way that I teach briefs, at least in the 101 class when we're moving really fast, is looking at problem, insight, main message. And the problem's a consumer-based problem. It's sort of like, we want people to buy more tacos in the morning. Why wouldn't human beings do that? Or you're pitching staples for back to school. Why wouldn't parents choose to shop in store at Staples? And I'll take you through a case that makes that make more sense. But so then you're in the briefing phase. You're developing your brief. A lot of times that's really collaborative within the strategy team. So junior, seniors, directors are working together to sort of brainstorm different potential briefs. And then that's also highly collaborative with the creative team and the creative directors. And they're really helping polish and finalize and sort of decide which brief and which strategic direction is going to lead to the best ideas. And their teams are going to be able to work off the best. And then the creatives go into their concepting phase. So they're coming up with ideas to answer that brief or bring that brief to life. And during that phase, strategists, you might, from your giant, you've taken your mountain of research and you've distilled it basically into 3 sentences: problem, insight, main message. But there might still be information from your research phase that could be interesting to creative teams. So you're sort of, if that's relevant, then you're sort of providing that inspiration to them and kind of acting as a muse to the ideas or a sounding board. Like, do you feel like, creatives, if you have a good relationship with your teams, they might ask, like, is this feeling like it's on track? Do you feel like this is solving the business problem? Is it solving the consumer problem that we've identified? Is it hitting the main message? And then it's that phase that I was talking about when you're going into a client presentation or you're moving toward the client presentation, where you're helping them set up their ideas and explain to a client in more rational terms why this is going to be effective, why it solves their business problems, why it's relevant to consumers, why it's differentiated, why it's exciting and interesting. Then once the creatives are in production, you're more thinking about measurement strategy. So we're going to launch this campaign. How do we know that it's working? And how are we going to measure and track that? So those are the main phases of a project. And that could last anywhere from 2 weeks, which would be a really compressed, fast timeline, to 2 months to 6 months. So yeah, that's the strategic process at a very high level. I guess to bring that to life with a Taco Bell case, and it was year 2 of Taco Bell breakfast, and they were like, all right, we did a really good job in year 1. The year 1 campaign was all these guys named Ronald McDonald, and they were eating Taco Bell breakfast and saying, I like Taco Bell breakfast. Do you guys remember that campaign? They're like,
Yes.
I'm Ronald McDonald and I like Taco Bell breakfast.
Yeah.
So this is kind of crazy. So after that campaign, Taco Bell became #2 in terms of awareness of having breakfast. So if you ask someone which fast food restaurants sell breakfast, they would say McDonald's, and then they would say Taco Bell, and they would say Taco Bell before they would say Burger King, Subway, Wendy's. So within 1 year, we went from not having breakfast, not being known for breakfast, to being #2 to McDonald's. Yeah.
So that was your way of testing if the campaign was successful, by just taking a survey and asking what people associated with Taco Bell having breakfast or not.
Yeah, so there's ad and brand tracking studies. And for a bigger client like Taco Bell, there's third-party research vendors like Millward Brown who deploy those either on a quarterly or biannual basis. And they ask like who sells Taco Bell breakfast. And then that's, I'm getting really nerdy and probably too detailed, but that's unaided brand awareness. And then aided brand awareness would be like multiple choice, which of these brands sells breakfast, and you select the ones that sell breakfast. Yeah, and then there's tons of other questions within that survey. But yes, that is an example of keeping track of if your campaign was successful. So we were successful in terms of awareness, but not successful in terms of people actually trying Taco Bell breakfast. So McDonald's still had 60% of market share in the morning. I think we were well behind Burger King and Wendy's too, in terms of people actually eating it. So we had a behavior issue. And not a surprising one. Taco Bell's known for fourth meal and drunk food. Right off the bat, you're kind of like, why would I eat Taco Bell for breakfast? But we started to unpack that a little bit more. We started to talk to consumers and have them keep day in the life journals to take us through what they did in the morning. And what we were seeing is that everyone's mornings were very, very routine driven. So they basically, every weekday morning, they did the same thing every single day. And part of that, we were seeing from the clients' business information, I'm not thinking of the right term for what this is, that if McDonald's was on the right-hand side of the road and Taco Bell was on the left, people would just turn right automatically, because turning left was going to throw off their route to work. And they always took the same route to work, and any deviation in that could just ruin the whole day. So if you start to think about eating beans for breakfast, like that's a huge risk in the morning, right? But that's what we were trying to get people to do. And actually, the reality of Taco Bell breakfast is it's like eggs and bacon and a tortilla. That's it. But the perception is beans, salsa for breakfast, and we're selling to people in like Ames, Iowa. So even the notion of a breakfast taco is kind of radical. So the problem was actually, it's kind of an insight too, like people are most risk averse in the morning. Like they're just not going to take risks that would fuck up the rest of their day. And you become more and more willing to take risks as the day progresses. The insight, because we were talking to teenagers, college students, young people, and psychographically, they're already super experimental and creative. So the insight became around, if you do the same thing every day, and you stick to your routines every single day, then every single day becomes exactly the same. And eventually you lose free will, because your routine is so welded to your being that you can never escape it. So the strategy, just the line was, get out while you still can. And so we were asking these kids, like, get out of your habits, get out of your routine, shake it up while you're still young, and while these routines and habits aren't driving you, you still have agency over yourself. So, it's kind of hyperbolic, right? But I would say that's an example of a pretty creative strategy. And fortunately, we had clients that would go with that. So get out while you still can. The creative campaign did become portraying Ronald McDonald as this dictator that was forcing circle sandwiches on people every single day in what looked like a communist bloc country. And it was really fun work, but yeah, hopefully that helps that's a project moving across a timeline where you get the brief, the ask. We were doing a lot of behavioral, we were looking at behaviors of people in the morning, considering the attitudes of our core audience segments, moving into kind of a culturally based insight. And then, yeah, that sort of creatively like triggering strategic main message.
And that's what you discovered. Sorry to keep asking.
No, great questions, please. That's what this is for.
So
I'm gonna stop rambling soon.
The consumer behavior insights is what you found out before, that they were forming a habit. It wasn't post the campaign, or was it a post discovery?
It was within those days. So we were asking people like every 30 minutes to an hour to write down what they were doing from the time that they woke up until.
But that research was done, was that your, sorry, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, was that insight something that you had prior to, like, as part of your strategy beforehand, or was that after you launched the campaign, you found out there was a behavior issue and then you started researching that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we knew people were eating more McDonald's than Taco Bell from transaction data. But no, it was really, so it's called primary research. When you decide to go out and talk to humans, the agency decides to go out and talk to humans on their own. Then there's secondary and desktop research, and there's a lot of different syndicated sources that agencies pay to subscribe to. So one is Mintel, another is MRI Simmons. So you can kind of, there's all these studies that you can, Forrester, there's all these work, you can pull down all these studies, and they have done some research probably on like people's behaviors in the morning. But we got more information and sort of more original ideas from actually observing people on our own. And that's often the case in strategy. Like you start to get a lay of the land and understand an audience from these syndicated sources, desktop sources, where you're just like searching for information that already exists. But to get to original insights and strategy, like that's why we do our own research. And that's why, day in the life kind of journaling is a specific methodology. But another example, I guess, of a time that primary research was really helpful was when I was on Fruit of the Loom. We were doing their holiday campaign, and gifting Fruit of the Loom underwear is another hard sell. Like, it's only like parent to child where you should even be giving underwear to begin with. Slash like Fruit of the Loom just isn't a sexy brand that feels special at holiday time. So another super hard ask and thing to do well. So what we did is, it would be a version of focus groups, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. So it was sort of set up that way, but the way we structured it was like a white elephant gift exchange. So we had all these common gifts like candles, calendars, bottle of wine, and then Fruit of the Loom underwear. So there are like 12 gifts, and we wanted to see where Fruit of the Loom would fall. Like, would it just get traded immediately? Would people like groan when that's what they opened? And so what we found out in that is that there's so many bad gifts given, gifts that just sort of miss the mark. Like your mom went to Italy and brought you back this necklace, and it's really special and nice that she did that, but it's just not your style. Or, everyone had kind of like a worst gift nightmare. Nightmares, it's an aggressive term, but like someone's grandmother gave them a bunch of used Tupperware once. And so this notion of bad gift guilt came out, and people feeling like, God, I have this, I'm never going to use it, but I don't want to throw it away. Do I give it? But it has sentimental value, so I don't want to give it to Goodwill, and they just feel kind of burdened by these bad gifts. And most people receive bad gifts at the holiday. So what we were saying is, this is sort of, there are different ways to take this. Like it's sort of bad gift insurance. Like you can take a risk, but then do something safe like underwear. And I'm trying to remember the other strategic platforms. But I guess my point here is that, to answer your question, with the day in the life journals and sort of understanding more about routine, yeah, that is what informed the strategy, and the strategy informed the campaign. And then I also just wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between secondary desktop research where you're like Google searching and pulling reports versus designing your own research studies, which is a really important skill set of planners and something that we teach in the research design class. What other questions?
I have a question. So with going back to the Taco Bell campaign, where you basically valued success by the number of people that associated Taco Bell with a breakfast place. That was probably, I assume that was done through like a survey or something like that. So how do you determine like a proper sample size for a company as big as Taco Bell? How do you determine, okay, like this is enough people for us to gauge whether, you know, this campaign worked or not?
Good question. So it's a formula. So it's total market size. So total amount of people that you think could eat Taco Bell breakfast, divided by a percentage that I'm forgetting. There's StatSig calculators online, and that tells you kind of what percentage of that potential audience is going to be statistically significant, and what percentage is going to give you, you know, an accurate read.
So there's a scientific formula behind it.
Yeah. And then, right, I always have to look that up. And then if you're just going to do like scrappy research for a pitch, and this is actually not that scrappy, but you can buy audience sample through SurveyMonkey now, and they have a StatSig calculator for you. And they just tell you like, this is what you need. This is the amount of responses you need to buy for it to be statistically significant based on the demographic that you're going after. But yeah, so you just reminded me of something else I wanted to bring up. There's all sorts of planners. So there's planners that are super data driven, and there's planners that are really into the research. And then there's more kind of creatively driven strategists that are, or kind of they're into humans and are into thinking about why humans do what they do, and they're kind of like sociologists, anthropologists, and then they like to write about that in super creative ways. So there's kind of more analytical driven strategists and more creative driven strategists. And so I'm sure, you know, I'm thinking of one strategist in particular, Katie, who would be able to tell you the formula right off the bat. I'm more of a bigger picture, creatively oriented words type strategist. But both are really important to have on your team. Do you guys want me to talk you through the curriculum and kind of what classes are in it and why?
I have one more question. I just don't want to dominate, but okay. I was curious if you happen to not have tests, if you didn't do the journaling beforehand and you did all the other research, and then you found out that there was a behavioral gap, you weren't getting the sales, and then you found out it was because of routine. How do you handle that with the client? Because, for example, when you're doing other, you know, paid advertising, for example, the clients usually understand that there's a testing phase to understand the market. I imagine you don't really get that when you're doing something as large as a creative campaign. So I'm just wondering how you handle that with the client when you're saying, oh, we have some new insights posts and we want to experiment with something else.
Are you asking about clients believing that your own research is credible?
Well, I think it's more of like clients' reaction when they say, hey, sales aren't matching. And then you say, okay, we want to do some research, and you find that the behavioral gap is that there's a routine. And you like, how do clients usually react when both they realize that the campaign didn't work, if that were the case, and then second, when you say, hey, we understand why? Or is it just
so in terms, okay, I'm gonna answer, there's a few pieces of your question. So so getting clear with clients on what the campaign needs to accomplish is really important. So I think in year one, and most of the time, advertising agencies aren't promising direct sales, because there are so many factors that can affect a sale. You could run the brilliant Old Spice campaign, but someone goes into CVS and that scent of Old Spice isn't on the shelf, and that has nothing to do with how good or effective the advertising campaign was. It's a shelf
Brand sentiment.
issue. So most of the time for big, large scale campaigns like this, our KPIs are awareness and what's considered consideration. So would you consider trying Taco Bell for breakfast? Would have been a better KPI for that campaign. And I think it was, we just didn't move consideration that well either. And I think, yeah, I mean,
that makes total sense. It's usually brand sentiment with that, so that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, right. Or you're saying, there's these presentations around breakfast currently that it has booze in it, or it's wild and it's unhealthy, and so you would say we're gonna shift that to people understanding like it's hearty, it's filling, it's you might move, like you said, sentiment measures too, but yeah, thinking about what's feasible for a campaign to accomplish based on budget is really important. And then that's part of selling too, like in evaluating creative, like, do we think this is going to move, convince people that we don't put alcohol in our orange juice Mountain Dew in the morning? So you're also using those KPIs that you've aligned on to evaluate work and sell work. And then I'm not sure if you're asking this too, a lot of times when you're doing primary research, the downside of it is sometimes clients don't believe it. They're like, oh, okay, you did a focus group with 24 people. Like, I'm looking for a quantified response from 2,000 people to actually believe it. So when you're backing up insights, especially to clients, you're using both usually qualitative responses, like people's words or behaviors or things that you've observed, and quantitative data from reputable sources like a Pew stat or Simmons data to say, like, this is, we're seeing the same thing here quantified by 2,000 people. So yeah, let me tell you about the classes in the program, and just about the program in general. It's not like your undergraduate classes in that it's not graded. I think the way that I taught Strategy 101, it almost feels more like mentorship, I think, when we're teaching, and as if we were all on a team together working a project. So those are big differences. Like Jesse said, I think we all take what we do extremely seriously, and the teachers, I'll tell you about the teachers too, because I'm so excited for who's agreed to teach. But everyone's kind of like top of their industry and working at great agencies, and the only way to get there is by taking your work seriously. However, it's a more casual industry, and I would say we're all a little bit more casual than we are academic. And then the whole curriculum is project-based. So you're working the whole time, and you're working on work that you would be working on in an agency. And each class is meant to have a lot of opportunities to get what I'm just calling artifacts that you would put in your portfolio, which might be on a website, it might be on Instagram, but it's all meant that you can demonstrate you understand what a planner does, and you can do what a planner does in your own kind of unique and inspired way. So quarter one is it's strategic planning. So that's sort of like, welcome to strategy. This is strategy. This is that process that I went over, and then working a spec project across that process. So that's just like crash course. This is strategy. The next class is Research Design 1, and that's taught by two people from Egg Strategy. One's in Chicago and one is in Denver. And they're a strategic insights and innovations company. So they focus on research, and I know research as a word just sounds dorky and boring, but they do it in really interesting ways. And I think research for strategists part of it is dorky and boring. And then part of it's awesome. Like if you love studying humans and culture and learning about new industries, then research is awesome. I love it. And it's also, this is the class that's kind of giving you your toolkit for the rest of the year. So everything you learn in research design 1, you're going to be using for every single brief that you write and every campaign that you're working on with creatives. So those are the 2 core strategy classes in quarter 1. Then quarter 2, there's just a brief writing class, and you're learning about all these different brief templates. What are some differences, but more importantly, what are the consistencies across all? And it's just like at-bats, just writing briefs. And that's going to be taught by Francis Coyne, and he's at Havas. Super cool, experienced guy. Yeah, I'm really excited to have him on for that. Then there's a culture class. So that's understanding macro trends, evidence of macro trends, understanding your cultural interests, why those are important, how to harness them. Most importantly, understanding cultural bias. Almost always you're studying a target audience that you're not a part of. So how do you do that without inserting your own opinions and ideas and values and bias? So that's culture class, super fun. I think we're moving brand architecture to quarter 3. So quarter 3 is brand architecture and brand storytelling. And that's really upstream, what we call upstream planning. So working with clients on their mission, vision, values, how they're positioning themselves in the marketplace, and establishing a brand platform and point of view that not only their creative communications are informed by, but ideally everything that they do as a company is informed by this brand platform and positioning. So it's not work you would necessarily do as a junior, but it's important to know what that is, and eventually you'll do it. It's important to know what that is and why it's important. And that's taught by a guy named Jeremy Paredes, who's at Huge in New York. And the idea for all of these, I think we're going to have one remote teacher and then one teacher in person. The benefit of that in person is that they're experienced and they're there, and I think it'll be easier just to have discussion if someone's there in person and also answer questions and give you guys what you need. But then I think what's awesome about having remote teachers is that everyone there's a process, but everyone approaches it a little bit differently and thinks about it a little bit differently and has their own style. And that's partly informed by who they are as people and partly informed by where they work. So I think as you move through the year, you'll sort of start to understand what your style is as a planner, what really excites you about planning and what you want to lean into. And so I think they'll illustrate that. Like, you won't just hear, I talk about planning a little bit different than my friend Drew at Wyden, who's going to teach a class. He's the strategy director on Old Spice and Facebook. And he might create his own class, which would be super cool. But when he talks about planning, it's so much more like his feedback to me was like, yeah, like this is the process, but like, how do we not over process these students? Like, how do we make sure like they keep their own fresh ideas? And like, you know, he's just way more creatively driven. So there's just different styles. But sorry, I'm jumping around. Starting in quarter 3, start taking a campaigns class with the creative teams. So you're working on those spec projects, but you're writing your briefs to your teams and then helping again, as you can, develop those ideas. I think some of those campaigns will have live clients, and you'll actually be doing some work for a client, and some will be spec. Then in quarter 4, there's a thought leadership class with a campaigns class. And thought leadership, all the time clients ask, like, what's the agency's point of view on how we should respond to COVID? What's the agency's point of view on how we should respond and engage with Black Lives Matter? Supreme reached out to us. What's the agency's point of view on working with them and how should we do that? And that's always a strategist writing those points of view. So that's part of it. almost on all accounts, there's like a weekly newsletter where you're keeping your clients up to date on what's happening with their core target audiences, what's happening in culture. A lot of times, again, clients are kind of conservative, so it's an opportunity to show them like, here's what's really cool, or here's what cool brands in your space are doing, and kind of use it as a point of inspiration for them. It's also about personal thought leadership. A lot of planners write for Medium, publish their own stuff on Medium, or put thought pieces out on Instagram. It's not essential that you do that, but if it's something that's exciting to you, it's really valuable to you in your career, and sort of, you know, always having kind of thoughts and opinions and ideas on culture, on humans, on advertising, on anything, putting your thoughts out there and being a thought leader is a good thing. Then quarter 5 is putting your book together, interviewing, the job market, all of that stuff, getting a job. And so that's the curriculum. That's what you learn at Brand Center. And I would say the difference between it and Brand Center, I talk about it as like at-bats. So let's say you work on 20 projects at Brand Center. That's a low number, but for the sake of putting a number out there, you'd work on 10 at Denver Ad School. So you're learning the same things. You're learning the craft of strategy. It's just fewer, because it's a year versus 2 years, just fewer opportunities to have book work, I guess. But you know, the reason we felt like a year was appropriate is I truly believe you're going to learn what you need to learn to absolutely crush it compared to someone coming out of just undergrad, not knowing any of this. So your opportunities to get a job are just infinitely higher. I think that it will be competitive. I think your books will be competitive with Brand Center. And then I know, because this is the way Brand Center was, like all of us were hoping we could get mid-level jobs, and you just don't. But you're going to come into a junior position punching, like adding so much value to the department and punching above your weight, which should be more fulfilling for you. And then hopefully that means you're advancing in your career a little bit faster too. So that's the hope and dream for it. Of course, we don't guarantee jobs, but I feel like it's more of a guarantee than not going through the program or just coming out of undergrad and trying to get a job in strategy, which is really hard and competitive.
Do we learn about how to, and this might be more of a creative director role, but do we learn about leading creative meetings and how to get the creative teams motivated and brainstorming?
Yeah, I left that out. That's a really good point too. So right now there's the High Art of Selling in quarter 5. Jesse, I haven't even talked to you about this, but as I've been talking to potential teachers, the art of deck writing and briefing deck writing and presenting and visual information design is so important. You know, it is a battle to get to good insights and a good brief. And that's what you're saying. How you say it and how it's presented, both the clients and creatives, is as important. So there's a whole class dedicated to that. And then, yeah, part of that is sort of like, you know, there's a presentation. You could, and most briefings do happen as presentations, but good briefings are a little bit more interesting than that. So if you were pitching craft salad dressings, maybe you all go to the grocery store and shop for your favorite dressings, or you know, at a minimum, you hold your briefing at a brewery, even if it doesn't have anything to do with beer. Or yeah, you're always thinking about how can I add theater? How can I bring the consumer into the room and make them feel what the people we're talking to feel? How can we recreate the shopping experience that our consumers are going through? So yeah, that's a great question. There's a whole class sort of dedicated to helping creatives feel what you know, and feel and bring the brief to life. Not the creatives, and again, I always feel weird when creatives are in the room because this is yeah, we're not, I gave a talk on this with I had a strategy once, there's some strategists that feel coming in like they have the answer and the brief is the word of God and everyone must abide by it or else. I have a tendency to never feel like I have the right answer. So I'm going to creatives a lot earlier and like we're like jamming on the briefs together. But I'm bringing this up because I used this metaphor with Jesse and Heather the other night. It's kind of like we're the point guards to the creatives slam dunk or like play that ends up in the headlines. Or I don't watch sports actually, so it might be that ends up on ESPN, right? So like we're support. That's why we're there. We're there to help and kind of provide some information and ideas based on our understanding of who we're talking to, based on our understanding of the client and what we need to accomplish, to sort of give them a sandbox or like a path to area to play in, so that their work is even more effective. And hopefully, you know, if you're good at it, it's a shortcut to more and better ideas. Any other questions?
I have a question. Kelly, do you find yourself like stepping on the feet of creatives ever? Like when you're in that part of the creative brief, when you know the creative side is actually being conducted and you guys are you know, they're running ideas by you and stuff, do you ever have a moment where like I might have a better motto than you, or a better like better logo idea, where you just kind of almost feel like stepping on the creative's toes a little bit? Or how do you guys deal with those kinds of situations?
Yeah, so there's been plenty of times in my career where we've revised the brief because this awesome concept came up and we're all like, the strategist, everyone is like, oh, that's good. And then you have to, but it's off brief. But then it's sort of like, oh, why is it good? Why do we feel that way? And it's usually because it's answering the problem better. It's going to be more relevant to people. So, so revising the brief happens, but it creates a little bit more work when that happens. A lot of times it's justified. And by that, I mean, you have to go back to the client, sell another strategy to sell this idea. But that's why the whole process is so collaborative. So your strategy director is working at the top with the creative director from the time you get a client brief all the way through the briefing. So ideally, the creative director, and you know, he's the voice of his teams, or has talked to his teams, is as excited about and inspired by the strategy as you are, and it's really a team effort in that way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, at Crispin they say the best idea is boss. So if a better idea comes up and it's not off brief, then you figure out a way to make it happen. Mm-hmm. Do you guys feel like you have a better sense of what strategy is?
Yeah.
Lita or Peter, you sold on it over creative? You're not going to hurt my feelings if you're not.
I'm not sure. I mean, they work so closely with the creatives, and you know, if there was a role in between strategy and creative, I think that's that's what I'd look for. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think I definitely appreciate both sides and how they collaborate, and you know, ideally I'd be in a role that can be in that collaborative environment with both teams, and I think that's the way the best work gets done, in my honest opinion. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, Heather, Jesse, and I have talked about too, like the best creatives are super strategic minded and the best strategists are super creative minded. So it's sort of, it becomes a choice of what's more exciting to you. Is it kind of that anthropologist, sociologist role, or do you want to just be writing all the time? Mm-hmm. Which is, I wish I was that talented because I wanted to be a creative initially too.
It's not all it's cracked up to be. You gotta write a lot of really bad banner ads a lot of time. It's not any fun. Well, that does bring up an interesting point. Because I feel like a lot of us like could go either way. I like even me, like now having worked in the business like over a decade and like having worked with really good strategists at big agencies that do it the right way, it looks like a lot of fun. And it would like, it's like if I were starting over now, I would almost kind of second guess it. Be like, well, maybe I should do strategy because it does seem like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I started out, I admit I skipped this part of my job history, but I started out in account management for 3 years because I didn't know what strategy was yet. And at that time, I thought I wanted to be a copywriter, but I didn't want to invest in trade school yet before I worked a little bit in advertising and made sure it was for me. And I got to a point where when I was thinking about those headlines, I was like, maybe once a year I could write a headline that's good enough to go on a billboard, but definitely not every single day, and backed off of copywriting quickly. And then fortunately learned about strategy where, you know, it is that process that I took you through. But I have, you know, during briefs and briefings, we always put thought starters in there, like bad ideas. So sometimes if I have a good bad idea, I can slip it in there and scratch a more creative itch. But yeah, I just knew that, you know, as I was working with great creatives, what they were writing, I just felt like I could not do that at that level consistently. But, you know, the better you can write and the more creatively inspired you write, the better strategist you are too.